Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is the Casual Friday podcast. In this week's podcast, I have an anniversary to celebrate. I have some new hand-spun yarn, and I'll be starting 2 top-down sweaters with set-in sleeves using different construction methods: simultaneous set-in sleeves and contiguous set-in sleeves. After that, I'll talk about the techniques that are used in contiguous construction that some designers mislabel, which can lead to confusion for both advanced knitters and newer knitters. So let's get started. You might notice a little continuity differences in this video. I originally intended to publish yesterday, which was Friday, and I started to not feel well in the afternoon. I still had some things to record or re-record that hadn't worked out right the first time. I just couldn't do it. So same sweater, second day here, but I hope you don't mind. But enough of that. What I want to talk about first is that my YouTube channel is old enough to vote. It is now 18 years old. I created my channel and uploaded the first video on March 5th, 2007. It was not a knitting video. It was a video of my daughter figure skating at a competition that I wanted to share with family who lived out of state. And for the first couple of years, that was most of the videos that I uploaded were of my daughter figure skating. Those have all been set to private. The very first knitting video that I posted was just a month after I created the channel, and it's 10 seconds long, showing how I knit when I use long straight needles and my English style. Literally 10 seconds long. And I didn't do another knitting video for about a year and a half. I really started doing knitting videos in about 2009. Most of those were as sort of supplemental material for in-person classes that I was teaching, or as reference for articles, technical knitting articles that I was writing for a knitting column I had called Ask a Knitter that was on Ravelry. In the early days of Ravelry, they had a newsletter called This Week in Ravelry, and I had a column in there. And the newsletter ended in October of 2011. And after that, I just uploaded very sporadically over the next few years. It wasn't until early 2017, the channel was almost 10 years old, when I started posting weekly. And that was when I started posting weekly technique videos. The following year, 2018, I started also posting weekly Casual Friday episodes. So I was doing 2 videos a week for, I think, 3 years. And then I dropped Technique Tuesday down to every other week. And then Casual Friday has been every other week for the past year and a half. So I just do 1 video a week now. But if you are interested in learning more about the history of my channel in the context of the history of YouTube, because things really have changed over the years, I talked about this when my channel hit 100,000 subscribers. So I will link to that video down in the show notes if you missed that and are interested. So thank you, all of you who watch my videos, whether this is the first video of mine that you are watching or you've been a longtime viewer. If you are new to my channel, more than 300 Casual Friday episodes, more than 300 technique videos. There's a lot out there, a lot more to come, but enjoy yourself, and thank you all for being here. So a couple of weeks ago, I was at a knitting group at a brewery, and people were passing around these little postcard flyer things about an event that was going to go on at another brewery called Crafters Gonna Craft. And I didn't really know what it was going to be. I knew that there were going to be classes that you could sign up for that would be paid, but otherwise there would be vendors there and just, people hanging out and knitting or spinning or crocheting or doing whatever their craft of choice was. And so I thought, well, that sounds like fun. I'll go to that. And I had no intention of buying anything. I'm not a stasher. I tend to buy yarn for a project because if I see something I love, I buy it and I don't know what to make with it and I end up giving it away. Fiber I have a little harder time with because I'm still new in my fiber journey and I'm still more likely to go, ooh, and it seems like it should be parallel, like I should understand. Don't buy this. But yarn is a lot easier to get than fiber. Like you either have to buy fiber online, go to a fiber festival. Like there's only certain times when you have access to fiber. So I just was going through the vendors and I saw this dyed braid that I really liked. She had a few of them and they were different colors of blues and greens, and I really liked them. And I was trying to tell, you know, the difference because they looked like there were some slight differences, and then I saw, oh, they're labeled differently. One of them is labeled, I was like, OOAK. It was OOAK blue. And in Minnesota, people say they're long O's, oh, like, oh, Minnesota. And so I was like, what does this mean? Because there were two braids that were labeled OOAK blue, and then there were some other ones. And I said to her, oh, I'm just trying to tell what the difference is between this and this other one that said something like nautical blue. She goes, oh, well, I have more. And she pulled out more of the nautical blue. And I was like, I think I like this OOAK blue better. And one of them is 4 ounces, one was 3.5. So and she said something about, oh, that was the one I was making. I was still trying to decide on the colorway, or I was still experimenting with it, whatever. I was like, she was telling me, and I didn't really clock what she was saying. So I bought it, and I went back to the table where I was sitting with other knitters, and I said I wasn't going to buy anything, but I did. And I said, I don't know what this means. OOAK, is it like how Minnesotans say OOAK? And the woman next to me said, no, that means one of a kind. It's like, oh, well, there were 2 of them. So she had just dyed up this batch where she was experimenting, and there were 2. I might actually, she still has the 3.5 ounce one on her website, so I might contact her and see if I can buy it, because I really like the way this yarn turned out. But I'll go to the overhead and you can see it up close. This is the yarn I ended up with, and I was really loving it as I spun the singles. As I was spinning, or as I was plying the singles, I had 3 singles, so this is a 3-ply yarn. I was worried that I was going to end up with yarn like in my early days of spinning, where it was really dense and really hard and just not that nice of a yarn. And I was a little worried about it because it just seemed to have so much twist when I had plied it. So between my hands and the spinning wheel, there was a lot of twist in it. And when I brought my hand forward to let that strand hang, it was twisting back on itself, which is okay because it will lose some of that twist when you wash it and everything. But I was worried that there was too much, and then I was over applying it, and I was touching it on the bobbin, and it felt really firm, and I was just really worried about it. Came back a couple hours. I think we had gone for our evening walk. As I was taking it off of the bobbin and winding it onto the niddy noddy so that I'd have the big loop like this, I thought, oh no, this feels nice, and it doesn't have that same kind of energy in the twist that I had before. It seems actually really nice and squishy. Then I gave it a bath, and I whacked it. When it's wet, you hang on to it and then you swing it over your head. And I usually whack it in my bathtub, and then I rotate my hand maybe a quarter of the way and whack it again. And that helps to kind of distribute the twist in there, because it's hand spun, so there's going to be some places where there's a little more twist and some where there's a little less. And that helps to finish it off a bit. And in the end, it turned out, it's really nice and squishy, and I think it'll be a really lovely yarn to knit with. I'm thinking about giving this to my daughter Sophia, because I think this color would look so nice with her eyes, and she's a knitter now, and she might want to knit something with this, or she might want me to knit something for her with this yarn. It's over 100 grams. There were 4 ounces in the braid that I had, which is 109 grams, something like that. Now, the way that I spun this was a worsted preparation. It was combed top. So this is what combed top looks like. It tends to be wider like this. all of the fibers have been really aligned in parallel. And so when you are spinning and you're pulling it this way, drafting it this way, the fibers are still really aligned. And so you get a nice smooth yarn from something like this, as opposed to roving, which tends to be smaller in diameter and is a worsted or a woolen preparation. So this has just been carded and has not been combed. And so the fibers are going in more different directions. And the way that I spin something like this is using a woolen drafting method called long draw. And then that produces a yarn that looks more like this. So there's more fuzz to it. The fibers are going in more directions. It's maybe got more air in it. So it's just different ways of spinning. And you can spin a worsted preparation using a woolen method of spinning, and you could use a woolen preparation and use a worsted method of spinning, and you'll get something that's kind of in between there. So there are a lot of different ways to combine the preparations and the method of drafting and spinning in order to get different types of yarns. So, so this one is a woolen spun, so woolen prep, woolen spun yarn, and this is a worsted prep, worsted spun yarn. So let me do a close-up. So there were some, tonal variations in the braid, and so each of the plies could be a slightly different color, but when you look at it from a distance, it becomes more kind of solid looking. But I really like these tonal variations in the yarn. It looks really nice. One of the things I wanted to do in February was to restart this. Let me show it to you. This sweater I made from HANDSPUN yarn. It's a set-in sleeve sweater, and it was knit top down using Simultaneous set-in sleeve construction. And I have to restart it because it's too white at the shoulder, so I'm gonna restart it, go down to the armholes, cut it off, and then graft it together. And I was mentioning something a couple of weeks ago about how it's not a contiguous set-in sleeve sweater, and somebody asked me to clarify what the difference was. So I thought this is a great opportunity for me to restart this sweater while simultaneously starting a sweater that I bought the yarn for in December and have been waiting, because that one does have contiguous construction. So I'm going to go to the overhead, and we're going to take a deep dive into contiguous top-down construction versus simultaneous set-in sleeve construction. And I will show you how I get these started and what they look like at different stages. You're just going to see the beginnings of it right now, but as I go through knitting them, at some point they're going to be a sweater. But just that beginning construction process so you can see how that goes. So let's go to the overhead and I'll walk you through it. This is what the schematic of a set-in sleeve sweater would look like. You have the front with the neck. Could be a V-neck, it could be a scoop, it could be, you could have a cardigan, whatever. But you have the front like this, so the body comes up straight. You could have waist shaping, but it comes up to the armholes, and then the body comes in so that you have this line coming right up to the edge of the shoulders. So the body narrows in like this, and then the shoulders have shaping to them because the top of your neck, if you look at your neck, you have shoulders that are sloped like this, and so you have a sweater that is sloped the way that your shoulders are. The sleeve has a shape with a sleeve cap like this, and so this round shape, this distance right here, fits into this armhole up to the top and then back around again. And so this is sitting up at the top of that rounded part of your shoulder, so it conforms really well. So this is really the most tailored style of sweater, and it fits the shoulders and it fits really well. You can make it more oversized, you can do all kinds of things to it, but it is the most tailored style. So there's a bunch of ways to knit this. You can knit it bottom up, flat in pieces, so you'd have a piece that looks like this and another one that looks similar that's the back, but instead of the neck hole, you'd have it straight across for the back. You could knit the sleeves in pieces like that, or you could knit it in the round and then just divide and knit the upper bodice flat. You could then join the shoulders. You can then knit the sleeves top down by picking up stitches around here and doing short row shaping in order to form this cap right here, and then knit the sleeve top down. You could start the sweater at the top by knitting, starting with the shoulders and knitting down to the armhole, and then picking up stitches and knitting the other half down to the armholes, at which point you could join them in the round and knit it to the bottom. And then again, you could pick up stitches around the armhole, do short row shaping, and knit the sleeves down. Or you can do what is called simultaneous set-in sleeve construction or contiguous set-in sleeve construction. So let's look first at the simultaneous set-in sleeve using my hand-spun sweater as an example. So this is the hand-spun sweater that I need to start over again. It's too wide in the shoulders. The way this construction works is that you get started at the shoulders. You can see that shoulder shaping I talked about. You're starting the shoulders separately. The back gets started and you work to the depth that you need for the top of the sleeve cap. And then you work the fronts and shape those. So you have those pieces started. And then once the shoulders have been started, then you can knit all the way across, pick up stitches across the length that you've established here to create the top of the sleeve cap, knit across the back, pick up stitches here, knit across the front. And while you're doing this, going back and forth, this is a cardigan, you're also doing the neck shaping in order to create something that fits at the neck so that the neck is lower. And this is a little bit more scooped than, say, a crew neck. So it's simultaneous because once you get the shoulders established, you are knitting the set-in sleeves simultaneously with the body. Unlike the method where you pick up stitches around the armhole, do short row shaping, and then knit down. So both of those two methods of working top down seamlessly, this simultaneous set-in sleeve method and the method where you do the body first and then do the sleeves later, both of those were described in Barbara Walker's book, Knitting from the Top. That's this book right here. This was published in the early 70s. All of those patterns that you use that used either one of these methods came originally from Barbara Walker describing it back in the early 1970s. But there is two different methods. There's the method where you are doing the sleeves separately but top down and it's still seamless, or there's this method which is simultaneous set-in. So let me show you how I get this started so you can visualize better what's going on. So this is the back of my sweater. This is where I cast on. So I cast on all of the stitches I needed from shoulder to shoulder. This is showing you where the neck opening is going to be. After I cast on, then I did short rows in order to get that slant that I need up to the back of the neck. So I did short rows and then I did enough plain rows. I think I did 4 rows here so that at the edges I have an inch worth of fabric. That is exactly what I have right here, ending like 2 rows above this first stripe. And the reason I wanted to do 1 inch is because I wanted the top of my sleeve cap to be 2 inches. So I want 1 inch hanging over the back and 1 inch hanging over the front. So I've done this back piece. The next thing I'm going to do is pick up along my cast on edge for the front. And then I will do the short row shaping here and then 4 rows of plain stockinette here as well, so that I have the inch in the front and the inch in the back. Then I will come over here and I will pick up the stitches here and I'll do the same thing. Short rows to do the shoulder shaping and 4 rows to get me my 1 inch. So this is how the sweater looks now. I have picked up stitches along this shoulder and I did the short row shaping here. You can see how this is wider than this is. And then the next thing, you know, I have to break the yarn when I do this. And then I join the yarn here and I picked up stitches and I did the short row shaping here. So now is when you start working across all of the stitches. I will work across all of these stitches. Then I'm going to pick up 2 inches worth of stitches along here. In my case, with my gauge, that'll be 10 stitches. Then I will knit across all of these. Then I will pick up stitches here, and then I will work across. And then I'm going to purl back. So at the beginning of after I've joined all this and I've come back, this is when I'm going to start doing my first stripe so that I don't have to do the first stripe while I'm picking up. I have a little bit of gray at the very top here before I start the stripes. And I'm also going to start doing the neck shaping at this point. I have to look at my chart and see what it is I need to do, but that's how that is going to work. Now this can be a real pain to have to do this kind of sharp turn around here on a circular needle. So right now I have a couple of other size 6 needles just holding these stitches. I have a second needle, but this is a case where, and these happen because I use size 6 needles a lot, and when I do a top-down simultaneous sleeve sweater, it does tend to be a 6. But I use the flexi flips. They come in sets of 3. You could use full-size circulars. You could use your 9-inch or 12-inch circs, you know, whatever works for you. But this is the kind of thing where I might use 1 needle to hold these stitches and these stitches right here. 1 of these for each of them, and then use the circular for the back until I have worked enough length here. I've done enough increases where this turn isn't quite so sharp. And then I can start working fully on just 1 circular needle. The contiguous method is a hybrid of Barbara Walker's simultaneous set-in sleeve method and a raglan sleeve construction. So with a raglan, if you were working top down, you would start with the back stitches and then you would start with the stitches that you have at the very top of the sleeve, and then you would have your front stitches. Now, you don't have to do all of them at one time. A lot of designers do that for crew neck sweaters, but another way of doing that is just to have the first few stitches of the front on either side, and then as you work back and forth, you also are shaping your neck. So you're increasing stitches along here to make this wider. And then if it's like something with that's kind of straight across on the bottom, you'd have stitches that would be cast on straight across here. And that would happen as you were working back and forth. So with a raglan, as you're working back and forth on right side rows, you would have 8 increases. You'd have 1 on the body right by the sleeve seam, and then you'd have 1 in the sleeve on the other side of the sleeve seam. Then you'd have 1 on this side of the sleeve before the seam, and then 1 after that. So on each side here, you'd be increasing 4 times. So that's 8 all together, and that would be on right side rows when you're knitting flat, or it would be every other round if you're knitting completely in the round. But typically, even if you join in the round at the beginning, you have to do some short row shaping in order to create a neck that's lower in front than it is in back. So the way the contiguous method works is that you start out very similarly to a raglan. You need to have at least 2 stitches right here that act as the shoulder seam. rather than increasing in the body and for the sleeve, you are increasing only on the body and you're leaving that sleeve seam as it is. Now I have a little saddle here that's 8 stitches wide. So it's a little wider than that, but it does the same thing. But because you're not increasing 8 times every time you're doing an increase row, you need to do your increases every row. So you're doing 4 increases every row, and they're always along right here. And as you're doing these increases, it's causing the body to get wider, and it's creating this seam line all the way to the shoulder. Once you get to the shoulder, then you can establish how wide you want the top of your sleeve cap to be. So if you have just 2 stitches running along here, then you're going to decide, well, my sleeve cap, the top of my sleeve cap is going to be about 2 inches wide. So you place markers there. And now that you have finished creating the width of your front and your back, you're not going to be increasing on the body anymore. You're going to be increasing on the sleeve, and so then the sleeve is going to get that sort of bell shape that you would get in other kinds of constructions. So this is what the contiguous method is versus the simultaneous set and sleeve. And like I said, there's a variety of ways of doing this contiguous method. This method was developed by Susie Myers, I don't know, 15 years or so ago. You can find a tutorial written by Susie Myers on Ravelry, but it's just really an outline of how the construction method works. And it has evolved over the years as people have done, used it in different ways. But a lot of these saddle shoulders constructions that you see these days do have the contiguous process. So now I will show you casting on a sweater that uses, that will have set-in sleeves, that uses the contiguous method. And this particular sweater has much wider saddles than this one has. So how things are, the numbers and stitches that are cast on at the beginning are a little bit differently than something that's like this, but it's still this contiguous construction because the stitches that you start with are the stitches you continue with. You're just adding to them. You don't have to stop, pick up stitches, cut the yarn, pick up stitches somewhere else. There's no picking up of stitches in this construction unless you start with the neck opening and then pick up stitches for the neck ribbing later. That's an option, and that's what the sweater that I'm going to be knitting will be doing. That'll be the only time I will need to pick up stitches. So the other sweater I'm going to cast on for is called Lenu, I don't know how you pronounce it, by Onkestrict, and it's a pullover pattern. I'll put a color picture on the screen so you can see it better. It's got a front panel that's got kind of a lace pattern and then just a seed stitch panel down the back. And then it's got saddle shoulders like that other thing that I showed you. It has saddle shoulders like this does right here, except that the saddles are about 6 inches wide instead of just a couple inches wide. So they come further in front here, and it's a more oversized sweater. It calls for Brooklyn Tweed Loft, which is a woolen spun fingering weight yarn. It's a 2-ply yarn. And then you're supposed to carry it together with a yarn. It's called Sensei. It is, I think, a silk mohair. So I was going to use the yarns that were called for. And I knew what shop I could get this at. And I knew what shop I could get the silk mohair. But the shop where I was going to get the silk mohair didn't have enough skeins in a color that went with this. And they were actually going to be discontinuing Sensei. They were getting this instead, which is it's called Yarn Citizen Luxe Trinity Cashmere. It is 49% super baby alpaca, 39% mulberry silk, and 12% cashmere. So this is like a luxury thing. This is an expensive sweater. I'm worth it. I did my swatching. I did this swatch first on size 6 needles, and woolen spun yarn, well, here's the thing. This is a fingering weight yarn. And yes, it's being carried together with another yarn. They want it worked at 19 stitches over 4 inches or 10 centimeters, which would be a loose gauge, except that you've got something pretty sticky holding it together, and then you've got a woolen spun yarn, which can be worked at pretty wide range of gauges, and it blooms and it's stickier, it tends to hold itself up, it tends to weigh less. You have like more yards in 100 grams than you might in a worsted spun yarn. So that looser gauge can work and still hold itself up. Where if you made a substitution with a worsted spun yarn that was, especially if it was fingering weight or sport weight or something like that, this would be too loose and it would probably stretch out. It did bloom and it got bigger, and so I needed to go down in needle size. So this was a size 6 needle, which with a worsted weight yarn, I can usually get 20 stitches per 4 inches, and I was getting 18. And again, it's just the nature of this yarn blooming. So I did not do the same number of stitches on these 2 swatches. It did not shrink that much. It was just fine on a size 5 after I washed it. Came out perfect, so I'll be using a size 5 needle for this. This is a situation where I did feel like I needed to do a gauge swatch. Often I don't. If I'm using a familiar yarn, like I said, like a worsted weight, worsted spun yarn, I know how that yarn behaves. I know what size needle I'm going to need to use in order to get 20 stitches over 4 inches. I wouldn't need to do that, but because I'm using 2 yarns that I haven't used before, and because of their fiber composition, the way that the yarns are constructed, and the gauge difference that I would need for something normally like this, this is a situation where I absolutely wanted to swatch. That's what I'm working with for Lenu, and that one is a contiguous construction with really wide saddles. So once I get that one cast on and established, I will show you what that one looks like. So this is the cast on for the Lenu. This marks the beginning of the round. These are the stitches I have in the back. There's only 13 of them. And then I have 28 stitches for each of the saddle shoulders, and I'm starting with 25 for the front. So the width of these saddles means that, you know, this whole length isn't fitting on the top of my shoulder. That's way wider. So at the beginning, some of this is coming around to the back. And when I start doing the shaping with this, because I've cast on in the round, I'm going to be doing short rows where I'm going to go right to the center of the shoulder. So it'll be right on top of the shoulder. And then I will go back, and then I go a little bit more forward, and then a little bit more forward, and so on until the last, then I get a short row where I'm coming to each of these. So that's going to mean that I am adding stitches at the side of the shoulder on the back only, which is going to widen the number of stitches for the back before it starts widening it for the front. Once there'll be a couple of more short rows where I'm going in a couple of stitches at a time here in the front and back. So I'll be adding stitches on both the front and the back while I'm still raising the back of the neck and helping the neck be lower. And then I'll start going in the round, and as I go in the round, I will just be constantly, every single round, doing a make one here and a make one here. So every single round I'll be doing those make one increases. And that's going to get me started with this sweater. Okay, so this is the back of the sweater. This is the number of stitches I had originally for the back, right here. And there's this seed stitch pattern here. I know this is really dark. It's because I picked out a color I wanted to wear, not one that would be great for demonstrations. So as I was working short rows back and forth, the back continued to get longer, and then the saddle got longer at the back, but not so much at the front because the short rows were getting increasingly longer and longer. But here is where all of those increases were done. So here's the saddle, and the increases were done every row coming out of here. And so this is what's causing the shoulder to grow and then the width of the back to grow. So we've got quite a few more stitches right here. I think at this point, the amount of stitches I have for the back, which includes these increases, is the same as what I have for the front. I started out with more for the front, and now I've added a few more. I'm just starting to, in between these two markers, do my increases for the front. And between these two markers is where the front panel will be, and that's going to be like a lace mock cable kind of a thing. But that's what I wanted to show you, is how this looked. I've got 2 more short rows to do, and then I will be working in the round. So I'll only be doing my increases on the right side of the work, not right side and wrong side, because there will be no more wrong side rows. As I mentioned, increases for contiguous construction are done on every row or round. On the right edge of the seam line or saddle, make one right increases are done. On the left edge of the seam line or saddle, make one left increases are done. When you're working the neck shaping, whether you're working in full rows or short rows, you have to do some of those make one increases on the wrong side of the work, and they have to be worked so that they maintain the same lean as those done on the right side of the work. In my, I think it's 39 years of knitting, I have rarely needed to do make one purl increases on the wrong side of the work. In most cases, if I need to do a make one purl increase, it's in a span of right side purl stitches, because increases tend to be done on the right side of the work most of the time. And because you can't see the lean of a make one purl increase from the purl side, when you do them on the right side of the work, it usually doesn't matter whether you do a make one purl right or a make one purl left. And I say that you can't see the lean. There is a lean, you just can't see it because the purl bumps hide the legs of the stitch. You see the legs of the stitch from the knit side. With contiguous construction, the make one purl increases are done from the wrong side of the work, so the lean of the increase does matter because you're going to see the result on the right side, which is the knit side. The instructions for doing any technique should be provided in the knitting pattern by the designer, but the challenge for the designer is presenting the instructions clearly and concisely so that the knitter can get the correct result. The typical instructions for a make one increase will tell the knitter to either lift the strand between the 2 stitches from the front or from the back, depending on whether the increase leans right or left. And if you're lifting from the front, the strand is worked through the back. If lifting from the back, the strand is worked through the front. This causes the lifted strand to twist as it's worked. These steps involving front and back instructions, while they work in writing, they're clear and they're concise, they don't help the knitter remember which of these is going to produce a left-leaning or right-leaning increase. So knitters will often come up with mnemonic devices to help them remember which way do I do it if it's left, which way do I do it if it's right. So I want to show you how you can know which way to do a make one increase by paying attention to the left and right signals you get while working a left or right increase. Okay, so I'm going to quickly show you a make one left increase. I'm using my left hand needle. I am lifting this strand up. It is leaning left. That means I'm on the right track because I want to do a make one left. Make one increases need to twist. Anytime you want to do a twisted stitch, whether it's a make one increase, a twisted knit or twisted purl, whatever you want to do, if it twists, the way to do that is to work it through the trailing leg of the stitch. The leading leg of the stitch is the one that's closest to the tip. That would be this one coming over the front. The trailing leg is the one coming over the back. It's the one furthest from the tip, and it's connected to the next stitch. So to make this twist, I have to work it through that trailing leg. So that's over the back of the work. So I go through the back and look, my working needle is pointed left. So I've got so many left things. I lifted with my left needle, it was angled left, my working needle is pointed to the left. All of those clues, and it comes off the needle, and under the needle you can see that it is twisted to the left. So what happens if we do that in a purl stitch? If we lift it the same way, left hand needle lifts that strand, it's going to be angled to the left. And again, if we want something to twist, we have to work through the trailing leg. That's this one, but we are in a purl situation, so I have to purl through that. This time, of course, the needle isn't pointing to the left, but that's fine. We still have enough clues for knowing that we're doing something that leans left. When that comes off the needle, we can look under the stitch and we can see that that stitch is leaned to the left, the one that's right under the needle. So let's get to the end of the row and let's look at what that looks like on the back side. This one that we did just like we did the make one left here, we did just like that here except that we purled it. We look at it on this side and it is leaning left. So it leans left on both faces of the fabric. And that's because there's two different legs. The leg that's on top is the one that's leaning left as you are looking at it. So if you are doing increases every row and the ones on this edge always have to be leaning to the left, you're going to do a make one left on the right side of the work and you're going to do a make one left on the wrong side of the work. Now on this side of the work, it's pointing away from the saddle. On this side of the work, it's going to be pointing toward the saddle. It's still going left, but it is pointing toward the saddle, and that's because relative to this saddle, the position has changed. We've changed that. But all of these are make one lefts on the right side and the wrong side. All of these are make one rights on the right side. I'm going to work 2 stitches and then do a make one right. So this time I'm going to use my right hand needle. I'm going to lift that strand again from the front, and you see how it is angled to the right? I can put it on that needle. Now I could have just lifted this from the back, but if you have a hard time remembering whether to lift from the front or the back, always lift from the front, but use your left hand needle for a left leaning increase and a right hand needle for a right leaning increase, and you will always get it right. So that is leaning to the right. This time, see how that leading leg is over the back? The leading leg, the one that's closest to the tip, is over the back, and this time the trailing leg is over the front. In order for this to twist, we have to work it through the trailing leg. So that means we go through this way, and for a knit increase this time, we see that our working needle is pointed to the right in order to work this increase. So we have so many clues for how that's going to work. And if you look under the needle, you can see that that is twisting to the right. Okay, we're going to do the same thing with the purl. We're going to use our right hand needle. We're going to lift it up and we can see that it is angled to the right, so we know we're on the right path. Put it on that needle and we can see it's still leaning right. And again, in order for it to twist, we have to work it through the trailing leg, which we can see is the one over the front. The make one right purl is the easier one to do because you can just go right through the front here, bring the yarn around and pull it through. And once again, it does twist to the right. Purl increases are harder to see in the purl background because it's the legs that determine whether something leans, and you really can't see the legs from the purl side. You see the legs from the knit side. But once again, when we look under the needle, we can see this increase right here, and it is twisted to the right. So you use the same exact maneuvers, you have all of the same clues, the only difference is whether you are knitting or purling through that trailing leg. What I've just shown you isn't as easy to express clearly and concisely in writing, but it is a good way of understanding how to know what you're doing and how to confirm that you're doing things correctly. So we've established that a make one left is done essentially the same exact way for knits and purls in terms of how the strand is lifted and where the trailing leg is. Likewise, we've established that for make one right. We've also established that something that twists left on the side of the fabric that's facing you will also twist left on the other side when that side faces you. So in order to always get left-leaning increases stacked on top of each other, we always work them so that they lean left, regardless of whether we do them on the right side or the wrong side of the work. So here's the problem. Some designers will instruct to do a make one left on the right side of the work, but then they will say to do a make one right purl on the wrong side of the work in that same location. So this sounds wrong, but here's the reason why it might not be wrong. In the context of a given pattern, the designer defines the terms used in that pattern. When those techniques are used in the pattern, as long as the definition the designer gives works in the pattern, then it is technically correct. There's a lot of ambiguities in the knitting world. If you were to ask a knitter in the UK what moss stitch was, they would likely give you a different answer than a knitter in the US. What we call seed stitch in the US is what knitters in the UK call moss stitch. What we call moss stitch, they call Irish moss or double moss, and what we call double moss, they call box stitch. So defining terms is important, not just to instruct knitters who are unfamiliar with the technique, but for the experienced knitters to confirm that an abbreviation or a chart symbol means what they think it means. Cable abbreviations can really vary, in part because there are a lot more ways for stitches to cross each other than there are ways of abbreviating those crossings. Some systems of abbreviations are better than others at containing the information you need in the abbreviation, but not everyone uses the same system. There are no standards in knitting. So eliminating ambiguity is a really good reason for defining terms, and knitters need to understand that another pattern might define things differently. The problem, as I see it, comes when a technique or term has far less ambiguity. Deviating from the convention can cause confusion. So for example, let's say I wrote a knitting pattern where all of the decreases were left-leaning twisted decreases. And I didn't feel like writing out K2 tog TBL throughout the entire pattern every time I needed a decrease. What I could do was assign the abbreviation K2 tog, or an even shorter one, K2T, to that decrease. And it would be correct for that pattern. But would it confuse knitters? Probably. How many people would even bother to look at the pattern's glossary to confirm what K2 tog means? I mean, it's like the most obvious thing to us. But what if a beginner was confused by the instructions for how to do the decrease, so they looked it up on YouTube? Are they likely to get a video that shows them what they need to know? Probably not. So back to the make one increases. The zipper neck pattern instructions tell the knitter to do a make one right on the right edge of the saddle and a make one left on the left edge. But on the wrong side of the work, where the make one left increases were done, the pattern says to do a make one right purl. And where the make one right increases were done on the right side, the pattern says to do a make one left purl. As an experienced knitter who knows how to do make one increases in either direction from the knit side or the purl side, I was confused by this. At first, I thought it was intentional. Maybe there was a reason to alternate the direction of the lean when they're stacked on top of each other every row, because I had never done that before. But after a few rows, I decided I didn't like the way it looked, and there was no reason that I could see to do it that way. That's when I looked at the definitions of make one increases for this pattern. So let me show you what that looks like. What you can see is that she defines make one right increases differently for knit versus purl. And for make one left increases, she does the same. The strand is not lifted the same way for both make one right increases or for make one left increases. So if I follow her instructions for a make one right purl when she says to do it, I will get what I think of as a make one purl left, and all of the increases will be pointed in the right direction. So this is all true, and it works within the definitions and the context of this pattern, but it's confusing and it's not logical. I would label it incorrect, or at least flawed. The thing is, it wasn't just this pattern confusing just me, a person who didn't look at the definitions before I started knitting. It was also confusing to my daughter, who is a newer knitter and who had never done make one increases from the purl side. She bought a petite knit pattern for a sweater, her first sweater in December, and was confused by the instructions. So she went to YouTube and searched for make one purl increases and became more confused when the demonstration didn't match the instructions in her pattern. So Petite Knit isn't the only designer mislabeling make one purl increases. The wingspan shawl that I recently completed for the Loose Ends project had the same issue. All of the make one increases, there were make one rights throughout the shawl, and they were all done from the right side of the work. It wasn't until I was binding off the second half of the shawl where things were mirrored and it had to be done from the reverse side that I had to do make one purls right and left, and it had the same exact flipping of the labels on those increases. And again, if you follow the instructions that he had for make one right purl, make one left purl, it would give you the correct result. They're just not the labels that conventionally would be used for those increases. So I don't know why these very competent, talented designers are making this mistake. And I do wonder if other designers are making the same mistake. Like I said, make one purl increases are used very rarely, but this is a situation where they have to be used, and this construction, this contiguous construction, has become more popular. It's clear these designers know how to get the correct result. It's just unfortunate that they're creating this confusion in a technique that has become more common to use. So what I will leave you with is the advice to always read the technique definitions. And if you are knitting a sweater with contiguous construction, check the definitions of those make one purl increases. If they have mislabeled the make one purl increases, go through the pattern and write in the abbreviation that makes sense to you, knowing as you do now how these increases actually work and how you can be sure to know that you are doing them correctly. You have the knowledge for how to know what increase you're doing and which way it will lean, so you will be able to understand what you truly need to do in this pattern and how to think of those techniques. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below, or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.